Hello, Year 10 again. Welcome. The text is called A Christmas Carol. But why? Mrs. Yesufu, why do you think Dickens chooses to set the text at Christmas?
Quite an interesting notion, this, because if you remember an assembly I had in school once, we talked about Christmas and the fact that it could be a fake time, it could be a good time. And it's quite interesting. Dickens decided to set this novella on the backdrop of Christmas. You all know what Christmas time is like. For some of the people who have a lot of money, it's a time for joy and lots of presents, thousands of pounds they've spent on Christmas presents. And everybody's happy, a season to be jolly, tra la 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 la, and all that joyfulness and all the wonders and all the beauty of the time. However, Dickens was quite clever in setting the story, the novella at this time, because he wanted to draw an attention to the fact that despite all these Christmassy ideas, there are people out there who are still quite poor. People who probably don't have any food to eat, and he uses the characters in there to represent, as construct to represent that. But he did it in a very clever way. He showed Christmas, although it's a season when people are supposed to be full of joy and happiness. He's very clever because Scrooge is meant to be very, very rich, does not have a particularly good Christmas. He is a sad man. And the Cratchits, who are very, very poor, he's given them that big heart to be happy, even though they are poor, but they are rich in spirit. While Dickens is poor in his spirit, he's poverty-stricken. He might have all the money in the world, but he has nothing really if you don't have emotional intelligence, that when you have money at this season of the year, Yuletide season, a cold season, where there's so much snow and there's loneliness and poverty, you cannot even reach out to your fellow neighbor, then you are poor. And then it kind of subverts it and makes it, that subversion is when it turns it around. He makes sure that the people who are poor enjoy this season. And he will show us different flashes of Christmases in different parts, from the poor people to all these people. The only person he shows to be quite happy is the nephew. You're going to come across him. So since a Christmas season, what does it represent to you? The holly, the ivy, the gentle giant you're going to come across. All the Christmases come at once, and the beauty that comes, and the joy, and it sprinkles all that beauty upon the life of people and the happiness of the people. What does that mean? What is the symbolism of that? That's why this story is extremely important, because we get to see the backdrop of this story, a Christmas season, a season to be full of joy, a season when you are supposed to love one another, a season where you're supposed to be kind, and Scrooge is not. And then we hate him even more.
So Christmas, the first 6 letters of it, if I can count, are Christ. It has a sort of an unbreakable connection with that of Christianity. Why do you think Dickens has so many religious connections, allusions in his text? Why do you think that? Why does he root it so much?
Yeah, you have to understand, that I know it's a blanket statement sometimes. A lot of examiners and people don't always like people saying that time everybody was. No, but Dickens was a believer in God. He might not have liked a lot of the things that he did in church. Like you come across with Blake. He might not have liked a lot of the things he did in church, but he was a man of God, and he was taught the Bible, and he took quite a lot of his allusions from the Bible, like the idea of the 7 deadly sins and the idea of the virtues, the 10 commandments. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witnesses against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt honor thy father and the mother. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain. All those things, as well as the concept of believing in heaven and hell. Heaven and hell is quite important here for you to understand. If you're a non-believer, if you're not a Christian, you might be wondering, what does heaven and hell mean here? And what does the concept of purgatory mean? Purgatory is very important, a very big allusion. Purgatory, according to the Christian belief, is a state of limbo. And then you'll be asking me, what does that mean? For example, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church believed in so much in the purgatory church, the Catholic doctrine believes in purgatory. You'll be asking, where is this purgatory? Limbo, sitting in limbo. You're neither here or there. You're not dead or you're not alive. And you're going to find, quite interestingly enough, that purgatory was where Marley was. And so many others, which meant to us that Scrooge might probably be going there as well. He didn't belong here. He had no resting place. He's forged, like Marley forged so many chains. You're going to come across that. So many chains. What are these chains? Chains of bondage. Chains of all the 7 deadly sins that he had gathered his whole life through. Chains that never did him any good while he was alive. Now, when he's dead, he doesn't carry the money with him to that horrible place. So he's stuck in kind of like a twilight zone. Cloud 9, no responsibility. Floating in space, nothing good. So he's stuck in that place and he can't move on, he can't come back. So, but we see, again, another of Dickens's clever styles. He allows Marley to come back from purgatory, to come and give a message to Dickens. Hopefully, society reading at that time would understand. The majority of people at that time, in the context of the time, would have been taught the Bible, and they would have understood what it meant. I don't know about today's society because a lot of people don't go to church, but just for you to know, you can only write from what you know. I remember mentioning to somebody the other day, if you're going to write a story today, you'll be talking about internet, what do you think, Instagram, and whatever else,
Lockdown.
And people in 1,000 years, what else?
Lockdown.
People, yeah, lockdown. Yeah. People then, we're talking about lockdown now and the pandemic, like we started talking about 1918 flu pandemic. People will now begin to understand, okay, this is what it was like then. That's exactly the same thing with A Christmas Carol.
Moving on slightly, the text is sort of set against the backdrop of poverty, and you mentioned that in the previous video, as earlier on in this PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. An economist and philosopher, Thomas Malthus, is often sort of held up as representative. Scrooge is a representative figure of Malthusian ideas. What did Thomas Malthus believe in? Well,
Thomas Malthus was a funny one. The irony of this is that he was a reverend gentleman. He was a reverend gentleman, Reverend Thomas Malthus, 13 February 1976 to 23rd December 1834. He was a strange one, almost like somebody who believed that that an increase in the nation's food production improved the well-being of the nation's people. But the improvement was temporary because it led to population growth, which in turn restored the original per capita production level. What does that mean? In other words, if we have too many people, why don't we kill some of them off? That's weird, coming from the Malthusian theory, coming from a person who is supposed to be a reverend gentleman. So mankind is only doing well when there's lots of food to eat. But if we want, and then we have good quality of life. Instead, if we have too many children and we have 10 children per family and we increase the population, there's going to be poverty. So if the population grew more and more, there's going to be more poverty, people are going to die. What Malthus didn't think about was what can the society do to help? Why reduce the society, the number of people, the population? Now, I don't know if you are aware of some of the funny stories that have been going around about this pandemic, that perhaps the pandemic was set into the world to kill people so that there'll be fewer people in the world. That's what I've heard. Mr. Fitzgerald has raised his eyebrow there. I don't know if you've heard it. It's one of the funny videos that have been going around. Now, I might want to think if anybody does that, that's Malthusian theory in the making, reduce the population and destroy people's lives so that we'll have enough food for the few are left. So I don't know about that. So I don't know if that answers your question, sir.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously sounds like something of a conspiracy theory, but the principle of what you said is that if we have a great life, then we produce more offspring. So if living standards are high, we create more offspring, and the offspring. But if you have too many people for the amount of food that you can create, then that's where poverty kicks in. And so you get this kind of vicious circle, really, whereby Malthus wanted this system whereby if we limited the population to a certain amount, then everyone could have a great life. But
So that's the utopian. You know, that was a utopia, which is not possible. There can never be a utopian society, can there be? So you say no. So maybe I just add one more thing.
Sorry.
It became known as the Malthusian controversy, and it's believed that this Malthusian controversy is one of the reasons that Dickens wrote the story. It's one of the things that precipitated it, that made him write this story to disprove and to say nonsense, humbug, bar.
That's right. I think it's the point about human folly, isn't it? If you said to the people, you know, year 10s watching this, right, to have a great life, you have to live within this certain level with a certain number of people. But if you go beyond that, well, that's where you're going to get poverty. I don't think it would make people stop. People are still going to live the way that they want to, and hope that society can all come together to look after one another, to love your neighbour. Another sort of Christian idea. As a consequence of Malthusian ideas, the 19th century saw the introduction of the Poor Laws of 1834. What were the Poor Laws, Smith?
Right. Before I go into the Poor Laws, let me just mention something very quickly. Just something to kind of like make it sharper. What I was trying to say about part of the reason why Dickens wrote this story. He wanted to draw our attention to the plight of England's poor, the poor in England at that time. He combines the description of hardship faced by the poor with a heart-rending, sentimental celebration of the Christmas season. I'm just trying to tidy up something. And then he uses the calloused character of the penny-pinching Ebenezer and opens his heart. So why is this Poor Law? If you remember, when we start to read A Christmas Carol in step 1, and I think it's step 3 or 4, when his words come to haunt him. The Poor Law is based on the idea of justice and fair trial. Well, Dickens didn't like it because he felt there was something fake about it. He felt that this so-called Poor Law, which also led to the concept of the workhouses and the prisons and the treadmills, was something that punished only the poor. For example, if you were guilty, if you're guilty of something, you are not properly given a proper trial. You are thrown into jail. You're found guilty. If you're an orphan and you do something wrong, there's nobody to stand by you. If you owed money, you were thrown into jail. Your children will go to the workhouses. And what is very interesting about the workhouses, you might want to go and find out more about that yourself, is the fact that the workhouses were made so bad that the poor people didn't even want to stay there. There was no heating, there was no good food, the accommodation was poor. If you stayed in the workhouses, you literally died. You died because, I don't know if you realize that the weather, because of global warming, has changed over the years. There wasn't global warming in that time, and the snows were really very poor. The winters were really very harsh. And so if you didn't have warmth, you died basically, you froze to death and you starved to death. So the Poor Law was put into place. I think what Dickens was thinking about there was the fact that this Poor Law was against the proletariat. I didn't see how any of the rich people would fall foul to that. They wouldn't, because they had enough to eat and to drink. They had a house. They're not likely to be the ones who probably go and steal to eat. They're not likely to be the ones who go and prostitute. They're not likely to be the ones who owe money to money lenders and then end up being thrown in jail. They're not likely to be the ones who are going to go and send their children to go and work at the age of 5 to become chimney sweepers, which most of them died in the chimneys, and a lot of them ended up with cancer, and then their growth was stunted. Let me just say the so-called Poor Law in England was a farce. It was farcical.
So Poor Laws were, in theory, created instead of or in place of any kind of welfare system, which would look out to protect those most in need. the difference between a workhouse and a prison being one of, I suppose, a prison, you go there because you've committed a crime.
Or owed money.
Workhouse, or you owe money, of course, or and the workhouse being where somebody would go to voluntarily. But as you have said, the poor wouldn't want to go to a workhouse because of the terrible living conditions, the 16 to 18-hour days. And I think it even says in the text that the portly gentlemen, the men asking for money for the charity, they say that many would rather die
than go there.
So I think that kind of ties back into Dickens's beef, doesn't it? That
yes,
he's very angry and he wants to critique a society which leaves the poor to suffer, and hopefully suffer in silence. People like Scrooge who would prefer to just ignore them and let it happen.
Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? And those words are going to come to bite him later on.
So yeah. I think I'll probably add here at this stage that the poor laws were perhaps created as a consequence of industrialization and rapid urbanization. Effectively, what you had is economic migration. So you have all of these people who live in the countryside working on farms in agricultural work, and the work ceases in that part of the world. Then they would migrate to the cities over here. So you have more people in the cities all looking for the same jobs. And if everybody looks for the same jobs, but there's still the same number of jobs, that's where poverty increases.
And poor living conditions, very poor living conditions.
With
and infant mortality and diseases, yes.
That's right. So we have economic migration. And if we then also consider that those people who used to live in the countryside have also moved to the city, but even the people who already lived in the city were being forced out of their jobs by industrialization, with the introduction of machinery, mechanistic factories, which would take away human jobs. So effectively what you have is more people congregating into cities with fewer jobs coming up in those cities than would once upon a time have been the case. And that's going to lead to that bigger sense of poverty. So in terms of the context of A Christmas Carol, what we've covered there is Christmas, Christianity, the economist and philosopher Thomas Malthus, the poor laws, and then industrialization, urbanization, economic migration. Do you need to know absolutely everything about this for the study of an English literature text like A Christmas Carol? The answer to that is no. You don't need to know everything because we're English literature teachers, not history teachers. But Mrs. Yesufu will vouch for this, and I can certainly vouch for this. Students who are able to weave in that context very fluently into their discussion of Scrooge as a character are those who tend to write very, very well indeed about the text. So there are going to be some tasks again which emerge from this particular video. And ultimately what we're asking you to do is to listen really carefully and then turn it into something of your own. Listen to this carefully, do a little bit of extra research, turn it into something of your own, and start dazzling us. What's the purpose of this video and the purpose of the previous one and this PowerPoint? It's so that when you come back into school, for however short a time or longer time it may be, that we're all in the same kind of place, but we understand what's the purpose of the text, what's the backdrop of the text, so that when you read A Christmas Carol, it all becomes a little bit more straightforward, a little bit clearer. We know what Dickens's problem is, and then we can set about exploring the text in the detail required. Miss, do you have anything else to add? Is there anything that we may have missed for this?
I think that should be enough for now because, like you said, they don't have to know everything. It's the ability to weave without just bolting the context into, because if you bolt it to your essay, you're not likely to do well. However, if you understand where the writers come from, where's his point of view from his stance, like I've always told you in my class, stand on his shoulder, over his shoulder, looking and commentate like a footballer, a football commentator in terms of why does it do this at this time? What's he trying to show? Always remember the beef. oh, he does this because perhaps he wanted, not because, perhaps, remember we are not going to be assertive, we're going to be tentative, perhaps tentative in terms of perhaps he's shown this because he wanted to show us that. Perhaps, oh, who knows? Perhaps, yes, no, don't know. Whichever way. I think that should be enough for now. Don't you think, Mr. Fitzgerald?
I think so. So yes, thanks for your time. We hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful. And we'll leave it there for now. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.